The construction industry has been slow to embrace technology, but change is coming and it's happening quickly. Greg Nichols with ZDNet is here with us to talk about some of the trends that we're seeing. And one in particular, Greg, is robots. So just start with why so many robotic companies are now moving into the construction zone.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. There are really a few major factors. After a long slack period, construction in general has been booming, at least for the last few years, and there's no signs of it slowing down, which is great news. The bad news is that in a tight labor market, construction is facing a massive labor shortage. And this is a worldwide phenomenon. In Japan, where the population in general is aging, the sector currently is down more than 1 million employees. In the U.S., according to a recent survey, the commercial construction index, 91% of construction managers surveyed reported having difficult or moderately difficult time finding skilled workers. So that's not a huge surprise. Construction is dirty. It's one of the most dangerous sectors in the world, and it's volatile. It's subject to these macroeconomic pressures, and young people just really haven't been filling the jobs. The other thing that's happening is innovation. Productivity in construction, it's fallen in something like half since the 1960s. The sector has not kept pace with innovation, and in fact, a lot of the equipment you would find on a construction site right now, this kind of diesel hydraulic equipment, is the same that you would have found in the Panama Canal 100 years ago. And a result of that is that you have these massive inefficiencies in the industry. One statistic that I found really interesting: according to KPMG's Global Construction Survey, just 25% of construction projects globally, came within 10% of their original deadlines. And the bigger the project, the worse it gets. So McKinsey found that for mega projects, like big infrastructure type projects, 98% are delayed or over budget, and 77% are more than 40% behind schedule. So I think robotics companies are looking at all of this, and they're seeing a lot of opportunity, and they're responding with this rapid innovation.
All right, and from the technology side, Greg, what's enabling the move to robotics in construction?
Yeah, that's a good question. So construction sites are, in some ways, kind of the logical next step in the forward march of automation. So industrial automation, of course, it started in auto factories and it moved into other heavy industry sectors. And these were highly structured environments where like robots could literally be kept physically apart by virtue of cages from people. One of the biggest innovations in the last 20 years across automation has been this notion of collaboration, this idea that robots can work hand in hand or side by side with people without physical barriers. And that's aided by this convergence of different technologies, things like IoT and distributed sensors throughout the robot's body, computer vision, 3D vision, things like the robotic operating system, which is an open source operating system and has really served as the development ecosystem that a lot of these robotics companies are using to develop new robots. So this notion of collaboration, it's prompted this move of automation into these semi-structured environments. The classic example of that is like the warehouse and logistics center. At the same time, there's been all of this development in autonomous driving technology, self-driving vehicles. So roads and highways are decidedly unstructured environments. And in that sense, robotics technology, it's not quite ready for prime time. The technology has come quite a long ways, but we're not ready to unleash these cars on our roads and highways. So the construction site is this interesting middle road between the structured and semi-structured environments and the completely unstructured environment of the real world. So it kind of makes sense that the technology is moving into these areas that can be controlled. It's also an environment where people are used to working around heavy machinery. So it's kind of logical that these robots would be moving into construction sites.
Yeah, and on that there, Greg, we are used to seeing on the construction site the same, the tools and the big pieces of machinery.
Right.
So what kinds of robots, though, will we be seeing on the actual job sites?
Yeah, the thing that totally fascinates me about this is the diversity of the technology that we're seeing that's making its way onto construction sites. So some of these are, the robots are simply automated versions of equipment that you're familiar with, that you would find now on a construction site. You have a company, Built Robotics, which is making these bolt-on kits that can be attached to existing bulldozers. And they're borrowing technology that was developed in autonomous driving and self-driving vehicles. Then you have this other class of technology that's partially automating tasks that have always been done by humans. So in Japan, for example, a lot of this development is happening. Just 10% of the construction sector right now in Japan is under 30 years old. So there really is this pressing need to automate some of these jobs. And Shimizu, which is one of the biggest construction firms in the country, it's created a few different robots. One is Robo Welder, which does just like it sounds, it welds things. Another is Robo Carrier, which it's actually two large arms on tracks that carry heavy materials to and from different locations on the construction site. And then you have this thing called Robo Buddy, which puts ceiling panels and bolts ceiling panels in place. And all of those, of course, are incredibly dangerous jobs. So it makes sense that those are the first to be automated. Another robot that I've heard about in that ilk is this semi-autonomous masonry robot. It's called SAM 100, and it lays bricks mostly in a straight line under the supervision of actual masons, of human masons. Then there's this other very exciting class of technology, very forward-thinking class of technology that's completely changing how construction might be done in pretty short order here. And in that category, you have companies like Doxel, which makes drones that continually scan construction sites using LiDAR and HD cameras in order to spotlight specifically where shortfalls are happening, specifically where production shortfalls are happening, so that construction managers can respond appropriately. There are researchers at Nanyang Technical University in Singapore working on swarm robots that can actually 3D print concrete. So you can imagine a swarm of these robots going onto a construction site and working together to create concrete structures. And that, incidentally, is going to be aided by 5G technology when it comes out. That's certainly going to help robots work together more harmoniously on the construction site. I think my favorite example of this kind of new forward-thinking technology is exoskeletons. Exoskeletons are these devices that are human augmentation devices. So they either give humans additional strength or additional endurance to do tasks that they otherwise couldn't do. And the thinking there is that if you have fewer workers in the sector, if you can safely get more productivity out of those workers, you can make up some of that shortfall. So a couple companies in this area are Exobionics in the Bay Area. They make a powered exoskeleton for rehabilitation on the medical side, but they also have a passive device that can be used to hoist like a bandsaw, for example, overhead for long periods of time. Another company is Sarcos in Utah, and they have a couple exoskeletons. One is the Guardian GT, which is this large pair of robotic arms on a track. Or like a tractor tires, treads, and you put your arms in a master controller, and you can actually just pick up large objects that weigh hundreds of pounds without feeling any of that weight at all. They also make an electric exoskeleton suit that's completely wearable, and that augments human strength as well. So I think those are really cool. I actually got to try the Guardian GT, and I've never felt more powerful.
Wow, superhuman strength, I'm sure. You know, it is fascinating, Greg, just to think about seeing a job site and what all of those robots could look like in the future and working together. So before we let you go, though, we've been talking about, the fact that the need is certainly there for the technology. But as far as the challenges that some of these robotics companies will face as they move into this sector, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, of course. I think one of the big challenges is going to be convincing an industry that hasn't innovated, again, in 100 years to adopt this technology. And it's not just a use case argument. These are big financial outlays for some of these systems, and this is emerging technology. Construction companies right now come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and it's an incredibly fractured industry. So it'll be interesting to see how robotics companies kind of choose their customer bases and how they target those customer bases. The other side of this is the regulatory hurdles. Construction is a really complicated sector. So there's certainly government oversight of various kinds in the construction industry. And then there are typically, in the US at least, union workers on big jobs. So it's a field that really requires a deft understanding of the market. And I think it's going to be hard for a lot of startup companies to break into that market, or at least harder than they think. Just because they have the technology doesn't necessarily mean they have a product that's a good fit for the culture of construction.
Yeah, so really interesting stuff here, Gray, of course, because it isn't an industry that we talk about a lot when it comes to tech, but clearly the changes are coming, and so we will be learning much more as we head into the next couple of years with this. And for Greg's full article, we certainly appreciate your insight for this and research on the construction industry and tech. It can be found on ZDNet.